Yeah, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So thank you for the introduction. I'm super excited to be here. I just got back to Berlin from Estonia, so I'm in quarantine at the moment. And to be honest, it feels a bit weird to be giving a presentation from my bedroom, but so it goes. So as was said, I'll be talking a bit about the importance of open government data ecosystems for creating value in services. And I'll be doing this by giving the example from Estonia. Something to point out is, like why is Estonia interesting in this case is that actually, though Estonia was, kind of known around the world for its e-government rankings and it does, digital government very well, in the past, it was actually horrible when it came to open government data. We were basically near the bottom of the European rankings. But in the past couple of years, this has been turned around. So yeah, just quickly about me. I finished my PhD last year on the topic of open government data-driven co-created public services. Now I'm working as a postdoctoral researcher at the Hertie School Center for Digital Governance in Berlin, Germany. But the past 5 years, I've been in Estonia, did my master's, my PhD on open data, was working with the Open Government Data Portal, have worked a lot with R and data visualization, and have been really driving and been an active participant in Estonia's open government data scene. And something that I think is really cool is that I've been listening to the presentations today, and just before us, we heard about open source, and earlier in the day, we heard from Gavin Moore, who was saying, everybody's talking about the importance of communities and the importance of community for open source, open data, open movements. And that's exactly the point, and that's kind of what I want to talk about, is that open government data is not just, about the data itself. It really is sort of a system, and so if you want to get value from data, you need to approach it in a systemic way. So in this talk, I will briefly talk about the background and context of Estonia's open government data ecosystem. I will talk about like the weaknesses that we identified, why it was underperforming, the changes that were made to sort of get to counteract these weaknesses, and then also the results and what has happened so far. And so in terms of context, the sort of time frame from the talk is roughly 2017, 2018 until 2020, 2021. So on this slide, you can see that basically in the early years, Estonia was sort of a follower when it came to open data. We launched the first open government data portal in 2014, I suppose, but it had been built or sort of talked about since 2011. So the very first year we were okay, we were a fast tracker, but the portal wasn't maintained. And as you can see here, we were in quite a bad place. So 23rd, 18, 23rd again. This all comes from the European Data Portal's maturity index. So yeah, why is this? There's a number of reasons. Basically, Estonia's success with X-Road and being an e-government powerhouse is actually one reason, which is unique to Estonia. Historical reasons, we have the Public Information Act since 2000. So basically, when you talk with government officials, they say, by law, all data is actually open. You just have to ask for it. And there was really an incentive to just sort of have a person sit in a room and send out data if it was requested. Instead of being sort of proactive about it, they were reactive. This also causes licensing issues because any license that was applied is technically a bit more restrictive than Estonian law. And so our data protectorate or data inspectorate was actually telling organizations that they shouldn't put Creative Commons or something on the data because they thought it was violation of Estonian law, which is also kind of interesting, I guess. There was really a lack of knowledge about the benefits of open government data. People didn't see any impact. They just knew it was sort of a thing, but they didn't, there was nothing behind it. They didn't understand why people cared. No political will. There will be a slide on that next. High costs, it's not just economic, it's also sort of time and organizational. Somebody has to deal with it. Sometimes it costs money to maintain it. If you have a lot of data, it's being accessed via API. Who pays for it if you see large amounts of usage? Low demand. But this was sort of like from the government perception. They said people don't want data from us, so we're not going to make it available. But then us as developers say we want data, but the government doesn't give it to us. So it's this sort of a chicken or egg problem. They say there's no demand, we say there's no supply, but who's actually right? Lack of technical know-how. Some organizations don't necessarily understand how to do open data, many do, but it depends on the different organizations and what their IT capacity and capabilities are. And also in line with this sort of no political will, there was this, negative idea about data dumps, which they considered for the open data portals. So to sum this up, there was a quote from the previous chief information officer of Estonia, Taavi Kotka, who said that open data, in the meaning that you're actually going to take data out from the database and put it somewhere in the portal, it's just so last century. And so what he means is that in Estonia, we were so advanced in the sense that we have this X-road, which looks like the picture on the screen. It's really connected, it's sort of a mess. And this is just showing the interrelationships between all the different organizations, private and public sector, that they can talk with each other. So there was this idea, like, why do we need open data if I can just request the data from another organization via the X-road? And so, sorry. And so this created a situation where they didn't understand why they should put data available. Luckily, something changed. So I guess in 2018, we got a new minister for IT, René Tammist, and we also hired a chief data officer, Otto Welsberg. And René Tammist basically said, hey, look, Estonia is doing really bad in open data rankings. But if we want to be an e-government powerhouse, then that needs to change. So it became a government priority. And then with the new chief data officer, they sort of institutionalized this. And behind the scenes, he's been a driving force, holding people accountable and the like. As part of this, how do you actually address the weakness in Estonia's open government data ecosystem? Why was it underperforming? They launched a procurement, which was focused on revitalizing the Estonian open government data ecosystem. So on the image, you can see in the left column, what the situation was. There was 70 data sets. The portal is only 800 visitors a month. There's only 4 applications. There's no events. There's no working groups. And to be honest, when I took over at this point, I guess in 2018, in 2017, I don't remember exactly, the open data portal was basically in a state that it was not able to maintain. It was on end of life Ubuntu and Apache. It was running a Drupal CCAN mix, and Drupal hadn't been updated in forever, so it had multiple security vulnerabilities. The original developers had hard-coded all of the variable names and switched them from English to Estonian, so you were like 3,000 commits behind, but you had no sort of backwards compatibility. You would have to go through, change all the variable names, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was a huge weakness in this sense. And so we decided, okay, we're just going to build something really lightweight, really flexible, based on open source software, and make sure it's open source. And I'll talk a bit more about that. So our idea for the procurement and how to approach it was basically based on this 6-step process, which is model and understand the form, function, and concept of the system, analyze the shared mental models influencing the system, study and understand the current behavior of the system, identify the feedback loops, intervene at specific points, and then watch, observe, and monitor and changes, like what happens. So for our understanding of this model, like what does it actually look like? There was this one academic paper that sort of modeled open government data systems with these different variables. So the setting, the global and national influences, policies and strategies, data publication, data use, feedback and communication, benefits users, these sorts of things. So where is the ecosystem based? What are the influences? This is going to be like the Open Government Partnership, the EU sort of Inspire initiative, these different sorts of things. Are there any internal strategies and policies? How is data published? How is it used? How do these different parties communicate with each other? What are the benefits? And then once you have this, once you've modeled out all the parts, so like, who the organizations are, how they interact, what data is available, you can see where these sort of like pressure points are, and you can start to understand also, how people are thinking. And based on that, you can sort of start to identify the weaknesses from which you can make changes. So for us, we identified 5 main missing feedback loop, or sorry, 5 main weaknesses. The first was mental model. So this is kind of like what I talked about, that people just, open data wasn't a political priority. It wasn't seen as important. It was said that there was no demand. When we talked with the private sector, they would say, yeah, but why are you guys working with open data? Like, it should be up to the private sector to use it. But then you say, you're not using it. They say, well, yeah, because it's not available. So there was just this mental model that was in place that people didn't understand, why they should do open data. Then there's the legal situation. I sort of mentioned this a bit before. It's much easier to be reactive than proactive. I mean, it is quite a literal quote that this guy said, it's just easier for me to have the person who sits in this room and sends out Excel sheets if somebody asks for it. I've also been like on the other side of this. So the police and border guard, who are quite good now, actually, when it comes to open data, I requested data sets about crime. Then they said, we can't send it to you. We have some issues with our database. I said, okay. Then a couple of weeks later, they said, okay, we fixed our database, but we don't think you want this data. Like, let me send you this data. I was like, no, I want the data that I requested. They're like, okay, like we will send you the data, but it takes time because so it was this whole process. But if it had been open from the start, I could just go to the portal. I could say, okay, here's the data I want, boom, done, that's it. So this proactivity is important, but it's easier for organizations to be reactive, or at least that was the prevailing thought. Awareness about open government data benefits, there was no examples of it. So if there's no examples, they're saying I have to open up my data, but nobody's using it. If there's no benefits, why should I? The portal itself, like I mentioned, was very interesting to work with, and people just didn't use it because it was sort of an additional stressor on them. They had to sign into the open data portal with their Estonian ID card. Then they would have to upload the data to the portal itself. So they couldn't have it based on their own server or something. They were putting the data from their own server, putting it to the other server. So we had these copies. None of the APIs and stuff were working. And people just, if there's nobody's using it, they don't see that it's important. And then you make them go through this extra step of like putting the data and stuff there. This is hard. And then missing feedback loops. There was no way to communicate between data user and data provider. So there was just like this lack of communication between the parties. Yeah, so what did we do? We made a few different changes. First things first, like I said, we made a new open government data portal. We based this off, it was super lightweight. It's basically just HTML and JavaScript, just HTML and JavaScript. And it was built by a chief data officer in Philadelphia called JCAN. And so we decided to just use this. And instead of sort of having people come to our portal, upload data, deal with it this way, we said, look, I mean, many organizations actually had data on their own servers, but there was, we just needed a phone book basically that connects from our portal to their URL. So what we did is every data set had like a YAML template. You would just put the URL there, the name, the organization, boom, done. And it was always up to date because it was just a sort of link to where they had it on their server. If you wanted to add a data set, you could do this via GitHub, like as a pull request, or you could also do it via a form that we created. Sorry, the thing was based on Jekyll as well. That's what I was forgetting. Use case, make open government data political priority. There was a news article, I guess in 2019, where we were talking about how poorly Estonia had performed in these international rankings. And there was a really quick response from the chief data officers that said like, yes, it is, but we're making it a political priority now. So we're going to say like, if you got money from EU structural funds and the data can be opened, it must be opened. And there was really this sort of force behind the scenes driving it and trying to get rid of this mental model that says open government data is not important to saying, not only is it important, but we want to be a leader at it. And another way they did this was integrating openness into the Estonia's AI strategy. Use case examples. As I said, there had been really no usage examples. So one priority was to find some sort of strategic data sets that examples could be made from. And then like show this to people, like here's what you could do with open data. So I'll give an example a bit later, but coronavirus in this sense has actually been a really good use case for open data in Estonia. Another one, the most popular data set and the most popular application on the portal, at least when I was still there, was this really simple tool built in R Shiny that lets you explore public sector salaries. We also created a forum for communication and discussion. So this was also based on GitHub, just using GitHub issues, and you could discuss there. And I should say that something else that's quite cool about this is that if anybody wanted to delete a data set, it was always there in the commit history. So there was an example where somebody opened up data that should be open by law, but then the organization made them take it down and tried to charge for it. But because we had this transparent openness sort of perspective, you could just go and look at the commit history and be like, oh, okay, so the data was available, and then this organization made us remove it. Interesting. And then, increase events and opportunities for in-person discussion. So Open Knowledge Estonia organized a number of different events, reorganized the working group, and really brought people together to the point that there was always like a waiting list for the events. There was no sort of like, it became very popular, so to say. If we look at the results so far, we've gone from 70 data sets to 787, from 4 applications to 87. The user base has gone from like 800 a month to, I guess, 2,000 or 3,000 a month. The open government data ecosystem, while it had a lot of top-down support, it's also become sort of more self-organized. Open data has entered the main political debate and discussion. There's a huge increase in the use of open government data in applications. And we've increased from 27th to, I think, 17th place from 2018 to 2019. And then the most recent rankings were in 5th place. So from 27th to 5th place in 2 years, which is not so bad. So what are some examples? I will talk about 2. This first one actually was built together with some people from Latvia. So I assume somebody watching this knows what this is. But this is called Opener. And this used open government data to identify potential corruption and stuff like that in public procurement. And so it was built between Transparency Estonia, Transparency Latvia, the Data School in Latvia, the Ministry of Justice in Estonia, and Open Knowledge Estonia. So this has a bunch of data behind it, like political parties, business registries, things like that. Basically, you can go to the website, you can review different procurements. So I don't speak Latvian, but anyways, here's a bunch of Latvian procurements. And you could click on one if you were interested in it. And so like the filters here, you can see actually that it's has high risks in the filtering. So these are things that could be risky theoretically. So you go in, you see, does it meet all the integrity indicators? Like, is it a high risk procurement? Is it not? What was the cost? Who was involved? So on the screen, you can see like who the seller is, who the buyer is, what companies they're affiliated with. Are they affiliated with a political party? Did they make political donations? So in theory, you could say like, okay, this person is in this party. He donated X amount of money to this party. Then 2 years later, he won a contract where he was the only bidder. And theoretically, this is how it should work. But it's a really cool use case. And I think it was supported by the IMF, so the International Monetary Fund. Then the last one I'll talk about is Coronacart. So this was something that I helped build, and it uses open government data that was made available from TEHIK in Estonia, which is like our health information systems IT center or something like that. And what they did is they made all their data available about cases, hospitalizations, vaccinations, everything is available online in JSON or CSV. And we built a really simple SPA, single page application using Vue to basically display this. And at the beginning of the sort of crisis, we were actually on the health board page. We were, talking with different government officials, and we sort of represented, the best way to visualize this data. Of course, they now use their own solution. Now they're using Tableau, but it was really cool in the sense that it was one of the first and best examples where open data was being used by the civil society, connected with the government, and creating value in this way. So this is quite an old picture now, but we had a bunch of different functionalities. So you could play back the history of the spread of the virus. You can look at the number of active cases. You can look at the number of hospitalizations. You can look at cases per 100,000. You can look at cases per 10,000. Here's another example. So cases by county, then we added in an estimation, stuff like that. You could download the data. Everything was open source. So as the previous presenters were talking about, actually in Estonia, the government has really pushed this open source movement. And so many programs or code that is built for the government should be available on Estonia government's open source Git repository in GitLab. So the code for the open data portal is there, and Coronacart is also fully open. So if we want to talk about the takeaways from this whole experience, that's crammed a lot into 20 minutes, but basically mental models are important. Change the rules and challenge the paradigm if it's needed. High levels of transparency and decreased barriers for co-creation can help to drive the performance of the open government data ecosystem. Communication, discussion, and feedback are key. Understand where these feedback loops are, the direction that they're going. Are they encouraging openness? Are they discouraging openness? And make sure information is flowing. If information isn't moving, it's inadequate, it's incomplete, then the system's not going to function or perform properly. And with that, I would say thank you. And if you have questions, then please ask.
Okay, thank you so much. We have some questions that came in through Slido.
Yep.
Well, it's anonymous, but the person says that the claim that he or she heard is opening data would be expensive and useless if there's no demand for it. Isn't this is a problem of having no demand for it because of no access? So it's a chicken and egg question probably here.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. And I think I said the same thing, is that the government would say, you're not demanding the data, so we're not going to release it. And then you as civil society say, it's like, yeah, but there's no data, like, I can't use it. Even if you do ask for it, then they say like, no, yada, yada. But once you fix this by making it a political priority, once you say like, actually you have to make this data available by default, and once you sort of like normalize it, it really fixes it. So it's about sort of transforming the mental model, transforming the beliefs around open data. And once you do that, then things become a whole lot easier.
Okay. Another comment or kind of question, everyone cannot be the first by definition. Isn't focusing on place in ranking a bit short-sighted maybe?
Sure it is. I mean, this is going to be an how to say, like, this statement will make people mad, but I mean, one of the biggest reasons why Estonia wanted to invest in open data is because it looked bad in the rankings. I mean, it's just a fact. Like, as much as it shouldn't be the driving reason behind it, you can really see this. And you can actually see how countries are trying to game the indices to look better. So you look at, there's this perception that, for example, more data is better. And so indices will say, like, if you have more open government data, then, like more data sets, then this means you're better. So what happens, let's say you have a time series data set from 1990 to 2019. Instead of creating one data set or like one API that lets you access all the data, they just create one individual data set for each year. So it's like, instead of one data set, they get 120. And then you do better. But yeah, I fully agree that it's a bit short-sighted.
Can you think of any great approaches how to measure or evaluate the data openness? Spending money on this is one thing, how can we measure, but other approaches?
Well, I mean, it depends. So the EU has some new stuff on like high impact, high value data sets. This is one way of looking at it. But yeah, there's many different ways to approach it. Some try to sort of measure the economic impact, the economic benefit of it. Some try to say like, this is the actual cost behind it. It just depends on your purpose. And then there's different approaches that you can find in like the scholarly literature and amongst different international organizations.
Keegan, thank you so much for joining us. And by the way, the background of your bedroom looks just fine.
Yeah, it works. All right, thank you, everyone.
Okay. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. All right, have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You as well. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.